The Nigerian economy is in the spotlight with new leadership. We've got economic aspirations from our new president, doubling Nigeria's economy to $1 trillion, 7% annual GDP growth, lifting triple digits people out of poverty, creating 50 million new jobs, sustained inclusive growth. How do we get there with all the hurdles that are ahead for the Nigerian economy? Joining us to discuss further is the IMF Resident Representative to Nigeria, Mr. Ari Aisen, in our Abuja studios. You're welcome, sir. Good morning. It's always good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Kicking off, you've seen those aspirations. I'll throw to you our debts, the latest figures from the Debt Management Office. 87.4 trillion naira as of June. How can any development take place with numbers like that, Ari?
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a great pleasure to be with you in your show, which has happened many times in the past. You know, the issue of debt has been discussed broadly, and I think as important is to what feeds into the debt stock, which is fiscal deficits. It's the needs of the government that need to be contained so the debt stock can actually be maintained or be avoid growing further away, you know, from reasonable amounts. So as of now, debt to GDP is still at a moderate level in Nigeria. It's very important that policies are put in place, particularly fiscal policy, to reduce financing needs of the government. And, you know, the removal of fuel subsidies was a very important step because fuel subsidies cost 2% of GDP last year, and it was adding to the financing needs and the stock of debt of the country.
Thank you so much for that. GDP growth, second quarter of this year, 2.51%. You've seen those aspirations. The administration wants to get us to 7% annually. Is that realistic? What do you think it would take to get there to grow at 7% or more?
Yeah, growth has been soft, and it was expected partly because of the higher prices of fuel. Inflation has been high, unfortunately, has been biting the real incomes of Nigerians. That has an impact on consumption. But, you know, we are in a transition period, and the initial move in of the reforms were in the right direction. Removal of fuel subsidies and unification of the exchange rate. These reforms needs to continue and to reach what we would call stability, macroeconomic stability, because if inflation can get lower, if the exchange rate is more predictable, then investments can actually start coming to Nigeria. There are very good green shoots of possibilities for the country, and the potential, I always say that, has been there and will continue to be there and needs to be unlocked. So after a transition that needs to be well managed to avoid any potential reversal to prior policies of subsidizing fuel and controlling the exchange rate, this transition will eventually lead to a much better outlook for the Nigerian economy. And let's not forget, this economy has grown in double digits not long ago. And I'm sure that with the potential and the ingenuity of the Nigerian business sector, with supportive policies, a conducive business environment, we are going to see in Nigeria again double-digit growth rates.
Okay, another thing I want to ask you about, you know, we need inclusive GDP growth to lift people out of poverty. But, you know, how can you fight poverty when you've got 8 million people falling into poverty in 2020, another 5 million, or rather it was 8 million in 2022, if I'm getting, no, 5 million in 2022, 8 million between 2020 and 2021. So that's what, 13 million total. How can you lift that many people out of poverty when you've got that many people falling in?
Indeed. Growth has to be inclusive. You need to have job creation. That's very important, so people can be included in economic activities. Of course, tightening policies, which we think are needed, comes with a cost. So it's very important to be very mindful, in our view, to support the most vulnerable in society through these challenging times. So they eventually can also transit, despite the hardship, into a better position later on. So all the conversations about social transfers to the poorest need to continue. Our colleagues at the World Bank have been having very important discussions with the authorities on this, and hopefully the government can launch these important social transfers. So there is no simple solution to these problems. We always knew that there will be some transition that will incur some pain to all involved. It's very important that the burden doesn't fall on the most vulnerable this time, and that both government and private sector, particularly the elites and those wealthier in society, come in and together promote a solution that actually saves the pain from those most vulnerable in society.
Ari, I'm going to ask you a tricky question here.
Eventually,
yeah, go
just
ahead,
to conclude.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. No, just to conclude on that, eventually, if we pass this transition, investments will return to the country from abroad and domestically. There is confidence. And then job creation is a natural consequence for that. And with that, inclusiveness. So high growth rate with job creation to include everyone in society.
Right, point well made. Point well made. So tricky question here. Should Nigeria swallow her pride and seek a bailout loan from the IMF?
That's always a question I hear in various corners. I don't think it's a question of pride per se. In general, the Nigerian economy can aspire to stabilize without the IMF. It's certainly a sovereign decision of every member country to approach us in case of need. But let's not forget that oil prices are very supportive. The balance of payments are in a reasonable position. There are current account surpluses, meaning the trade position is good. So it's really a question of bringing more of this surplus into the economy, and, for example, containing or making sure that oil production benefits the economy is critical. So oil revenues and oil export should benefit through an increased production of oil, and that is part of what we believe the government should actually double or redouble efforts to be able to increase the intake from the oil sector. In parallel, revenue should also increase in the non-oil sector through better compliance. The compliance gap is very large in Nigeria. Very few are paying their dues. Those who pay may feel that they are paying all the burden, so it's important to broaden the tax base to include more taxpayers. And in parallel, governance and good use of funds need to accompany those increased tax payments so that everyone feels more comfortable with the new realities, that with a revenue to GDP ratio of only 8.8%, it's very difficult to make a meaningful contribution to improve social indicators in Nigeria. That is an existential issue for the country. I think the new administration is spot on in terms of conversations and with the private sector on how everyone can start collaborating to this effort of boosting revenues and providing public goods and services as the government should, of high quality and including all Nigerians.
Ari, I got to ask you about the exchange rate. I think you mentioned it as part of the reforms, more transparent. But you've seen the parallel market, running away from the official rate. I think as of yesterday, 9.95. Parallel, the INE window 7.73, so a gap of about 2.21. What do you make of what we're seeing right now in the exchange rates and getting more supply, FX supply into Nigeria?
Yes, there has been quite a bit of effort from the authorities in the past weeks and even months on trying to bring more supply of foreign exchange into the market. And I think those initiatives should be welcome. And advertising Nigeria abroad, there were very successful visits to India, to the UAE, now in New York. And it's very important that the image of Nigeria and its potential can come across very clearly to all stakeholders, investors, local and abroad. But a lot of the focus should also happen on the supply of nairas, not only on the supply of foreign exchange. And here is what we have been saying for quite some time, the need of tightening monetary policy, taking liquidity out of the system. There are too many nairas chasing yet too few dollars, as I have alluded before in previous conversations. It's very important to reduce the amount of nairas, reduce the growth rate of money supply domestically in Nigeria. In parallel, also, continue to rely, and these are good green shoots there, the fiscal policies should cease to rely on the ways and means. And we have heard that this is so far taking place this year. There are some legacy issues, but phasing out all the operations of the central bank that are not conducive to reining in liquidity in the amount of nairas in the economy, phasing out financing of the fiscal deficit of the government, focusing on price stability, tightening monetary policy is going to be needed. It's costly. It doesn't come without a price, but it's a price worth paying. First, if you protect the poorest and most vulnerable in society. Second, if you manage to stabilize this economy, maybe in 1 year and a half, 2 years, maybe we'll be in a different position with a much more stable environment, predictive, so investments can come in and Nigeria can unlock its full potential as we are expecting.
Ari, just one more question for you, not economic. Your time as resident representative here in Nigeria, it's coming to an end soon, and we've taken you in as an adopted son here. You've done some great work analyzing the Nigerian economy, giving us the best advice. You reflect on your time. What's next for you?
Oh, Rotus, this is a tough question, very emotional. We Brazilians, Latin Americans feel very closely connected. The IMF, I had the honor to represent this dearest institution here in Nigeria. And I can only, my first word is of gratitude for Nigeria and Nigerians for welcoming me with open hearts, hospitality, from the wonderful jollof rice to all the beauties of this wonderful nation and people. Time has come to me to move to different shores, to Washington, and I will certainly leave Nigeria with a sense of optimism that the Nigeria will succeed. It has to succeed. It has good friends, including in the IMF, and it's destined to be the powerful country it should be in Africa, the giant of Africa. And Africa depends on Nigeria succeeding, and Nigerians depend on Nigeria succeeding, and in fact the entire world. I will continue to accompany this beautiful country in all the future policies and rooting for success and much good things to come, and only good news for growth, inclusiveness, and reduction of poverty and happiness for all Nigerians. Thank you, Rotus.
We thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you. Ari Aisen, IMF Resident Representative to Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time. And of course, thank you for your service as well.